Most people think loyalty comes from being liked. It doesn't. Some of the most betrayed people in the world are the ones who tried hardest to keep everyone comfortable, who gave the most, who complained the least, who were always available, always understanding, always willing to let things slide. Real loyalty doesn't begin with being liked. It begins the moment people understand that your kindness has limits. And if they've never seen those limits, they don't actually know your value. They just know your availability. Part 1. Why being too available makes people take you for granted. Here's what most people never realize. The moment you become unconditionally available, you stop being a person in the relationship and start being a resource. Think about someone in your life who is always there, always picks up, always makes time, never says no, never seems tired, never asks for anything back. Now ask yourself honestly, how much do you think about that person's needs? How often do you check in on them without a reason? Most people don't, not because they're cruel, because constant availability signals that no maintenance is required. The person is simply there like furniture, reliable, undemanding, taken for granted without anyone making a conscious decision to take them for granted. This is where everything changes. Availability without limits doesn't create closeness. It creates comfort, and comfort, when it goes unexamined, becomes entitlement. People stop appreciating what they never have to earn. They stop thinking about what they might lose because nothing in your behavior has ever suggested they could lose it. The dangerous part is that you don't see this happening in real time. It accumulates quietly in the calls that get shorter, the favors that get bigger, the appreciation that slowly stops arriving. And by the time you feel it, the pattern is already years deep. Part 2. The hidden cost of always being the nice person. There is a version of niceness that is actually a form of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of disappointing people, fear of being seen as difficult or ungrateful or cold. And that kind of niceness, the kind driven by fear rather than genuine warmth, has a very specific cost. It teaches people that you will absorb whatever they give you. Pay attention to this. Every time you stay quiet when something bothers you, you teach the people around you that silence is your response to being treated poorly. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you teach them that your no doesn't really exist. Every time you smooth things over to avoid tension, you teach them that your comfort is negotiable and theirs is not. None of this is intentional on their part. That's what makes it so insidious. They're not deciding to exploit you. They're simply learning through your consistent behavior what is and isn't acceptable. And if nothing is ever unacceptable, then nothing will ever be corrected. The hidden cost of always being the nice person is that people stop treating you like a person with needs. They treat you like a role, the dependable one, the understanding one, the one who handles things without making it anyone else's problem. And somewhere in playing that role so well for so long, your actual needs stop being part of the equation, not because nobody cares, but because you train them not to ask. Part 3. How people slowly test your boundaries without realizing it. Most people miss this. Boundary testing is rarely conscious. Nobody sits down and decides to see how much they can get away with. It happens incrementally, naturally, almost biologically. It starts small, a slightly last-minute favor, a commitment they cancel with minimal notice, a conversation that centers on them for the 4th week running without anyone asking how you are, a loan not paid back on the original timeline, a mood taken out on you because you were the nearest available person. Each individual incident feels minor, forgivable, not worth making an issue over, so you let it go, and the letting go, repeated often enough, becomes permission. Think about someone in your life who has gradually shifted the dynamic of your relationship in their favor. It probably didn't happen with one large violation. It happened through 100 small ones, each of which you absorbed because it seemed unreasonable to make it a problem. And slowly, without either of you designing it that way, they learned that the dynamic could shift, and it did. This is the moment people lose respect, not through a dramatic event, but through the slow accumulation of evidence that your boundaries are more suggestion than reality, that your limits can be moved, that there are no real consequences for moving them. Part 4. Why the absence of consequences destroys respect. Here's the truth that most people find uncomfortable. Respect is not just about how much someone likes you. It's about what they believe will happen if they treat you poorly. When the answer to that question is nothing, when they've tested the edges and found no edges, respect quietly erodes, not into hatred, into something more damaging, indifference. You become someone whose reactions are predictable, whose limits are theoretical, whose feelings can be factored in and then deprioritized. Think about it in a work context. The colleague who never pushes back on an unfair workload gets more of it, not because their manager is deliberately exploiting them, but because the absence of resistance signals availability. If there are no consequences for dumping work on someone, the work will keep arriving. This is not cruelty. It is human nature responding to undefended space. The dangerous part is that consequences don't require confrontation. They don't require anger or ultimatums or dramatic declarations. A consequence can be as simple as becoming slightly less available, as quiet as letting a request go unanswered for longer than usual, as calm as responding with less warmth after consistent disrespect. What matters is that people feel the edge, that they encounter a limit and understand it is real, because limits, clearly felt, are what remind people that what they have access to can be withdrawn, and the possibility of loss is what creates value. Part 5. The difference between being loved and being valued. People can love you and still not value you. This distinction is important, and most people never make it. Being loved means someone has a warm feeling toward you. Being valued means someone understands what your presence in their life actually costs, what they would lose if it were gone, what effort it requires to maintain, what it would mean to live without it. You can be loved by someone who also takes you entirely for granted, who calls when they need something and goes quiet when they don't, who speaks warmly about you to others and treats you carelessly in private, who genuinely believes they appreciate you while consistently acting in ways that suggest otherwise. The difference between these two states, between being loved and being valued, is almost always a direct reflection of your standards. People value what they understand they could lose, and they only understand they could lose it when you have demonstrated calmly, consistently, without drama, that their access to you is conditional on how they treat you. That is not coldness, that is self-respect. And self-respect, properly communicated, teaches people how to value you in a way that warmth alone never will. Part 6. How overgiving creates imbalance. Here's what most people never realize about giving too much. It doesn't create gratitude. It creates pressure and, eventually, resentment on both sides. When one person consistently gives more than the other, the imbalance becomes its own problem. The giver begins to feel invisible. The receiver, whether consciously or not, begins to feel vaguely guilty, and guilt is not a comfortable emotion to sit with. So they do what people often do with uncomfortable emotions. They distance themselves from the source of them. This is why overgiving can actually damage closeness. You give more because you want to feel close. The other person receives more and begins to feel quietly indebted, quietly suffocated, quietly pulled toward people who don't make them feel that way, people who require equal investment, where the relationship has balance. Pay attention to this in your own life. The relationships that have lasted, the ones where mutual respect runs deepest, are probably not the ones where one person gave everything. They're the ones where both people had clear enough standards that giving remained a choice rather than a pattern, where generosity was visible because it wasn't the default, where care was felt because it wasn't assumed. Part 7. Why loyalty disappears when respect is gone. Loyalty without respect is just habit, and habits break the moment something more comfortable comes along. Pay attention to this. When people stop respecting you, when they've tested enough edges to know there are none, they don't always leave dramatically. They don't announce that the relationship has changed. They simply become less present, less invested, less willing to show up when it costs them something. Because loyalty, real loyalty, requires that both people believe the relationship is worth protecting. And people don't work to protect what they've unconsciously stopped valuing. Think about the relationships in your life that have dissolved not through conflict, but through slow fade. Somewhere in the history of most of those relationships is a period where limits weren't communicated clearly enough, where the other person stopped encountering resistance and started treating the relationship as something that would maintain itself regardless of their effort. Loyalty doesn't survive that. It was never built to. It is not a feeling that persists in the absence of respect. It is a decision made repeatedly by someone who believes the relationship is worth the decision. Take away the respect, and you take away the reason to keep deciding. Part 8. How to establish boundaries without becoming cold. This is where most people get stuck. They understand they need limits, but they're afraid that communicating them will make them seem harsh, unkind, difficult. Here's the reality. Limits communicated calmly are not cold. They are clear. And clarity in any relationship is an act of respect, both for yourself and for the other person. You don't need to deliver a lecture. You don't need to make anyone feel accused. A boundary is not an attack. It is information. It tells someone how to be in a relationship with you in a way that works for both of you. Framed that way, it is not a withdrawal of warmth. It is an invitation to a better dynamic. In practice, this looks like being slower to say yes to things that cost you too much, being honest briefly, without drama, when something doesn't work for you, letting a pattern continue for one less time than you usually would before naming it, allowing people to experience the natural reduction in your availability when they've been consistently careless with it. None of this requires anger. The strongest version of a limit is delivered with complete calm, because calm signals that this is not an emotional reaction, it is a standard. And standards, unlike reactions, don't negotiate. Part 9. How calm strength creates lasting loyalty. The people who command the deepest loyalty are almost never the most accommodating. They are the most consistent. Consistent in their warmth, so people know what genuine care from them feels like. Consistent in their standards, so people know what the limits of that warmth are. Consistent in their responses, so people never have to wonder where they stand or whether the relationship is something they need to actively maintain. That consistency is what creates safety. Not the safety of knowing someone will never push back, but the deeper safety of knowing exactly who you're dealing with. A person with clear values and real limits is a person you can orient yourself around. You know what they will and won't accept. You know that their kindness is real because it isn't infinite. You know that their loyalty is genuine because they've demonstrated they can withdraw it. That kind of person does not have to demand loyalty. They attract it, because the people around them understand, without it ever needing to be stated, that the relationship is something worth keeping, that the access they have is not guaranteed, that what they have with this person is real enough to be careful with. Here is the truth that this entire conversation has been building toward. The people who truly value you are not the ones who have decided they can do whatever they want with you. They are the ones who understand your worth, respect your limits, and know that your presence in their life is a privilege, not a guarantee. You will not create those people through more giving. You will not find them by making yourself more available, more forgiving, more accommodating. You will find them and keep them by being someone with a clear enough sense of their own value that certain things simply are not negotiable. That is not arrogance. It is the foundation that every real relationship is built on. Because the people who love you correctly, the ones whose loyalty runs deep and doesn't depend on what you're giving them this week, are the ones who met your limits early and stayed anyway. Not because you forced them to, because you gave them something real to respect. And respect, once genuinely earned, is the only thing that keeps people close when everything else makes leaving easier.